Hello, thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. We're continuing our series of programs where I'm interviewing retirees at Missouri Southern in the spring of 2017. And joining me on the first part of the program today is Dr. Paul Teverow, Missouri Southern history professor. Thank you for being here today.
It's great to be here, Judy.
And I guess, first of all, congratulations on reaching retirement and looking at that time. Your thoughts as retirement gets closer to a reality. What are some of your feelings as this comes up?
A number of them. First thing is, can it really be already at my doorstep?
Right.
The second thing is, what am I going to do with the extra time? I have an idea that the 2 courses I teach will take a little more than half the time of the 4 courses I normally teach. But that's just one of the questions I have.
Right. I'd like to start for the audience to become familiar. You've been here for a number of years, 1982 officially, I guess, according to the college catalog as a professor. Let's go back to the early days of coming to Missouri Southern. What brought you here at that point?
I was one of a number of people near the end of a PhD program who were looking for jobs, and I sent out a number of applications. I had a good feeling about this one because the qualifications they were seeking matched pretty closely my fields of study in graduate school, and indeed Missouri Southern was as interested in me as I was in them.
Right. Talking about your original interest in history, you had graduate school, PhD, and undergraduate. What sparked your interest at an early age, obviously, of history?
I can think of any number of things. When I was in elementary school, they were celebrating, and this really dates me, the centennial of the Civil War. And I was just fascinated by that. So even though I wasn't sure at that point that I wanted to teach, I knew I wanted to continue my studies of history.
Now, there are so many different areas of history. You mentioned English history, there's U.S. history. I mean, so that really helped you decide this is what I want to narrow my interests on, the English, the European aspects of history.
Correct.
And so that's an area that for students growing up here in the United States, they don't know a lot about. So you're teaching them perhaps parts of history that they haven't seen before.
Yes, and that's one of the things that makes my job both challenging and rewarding. And on the other hand, it's also forced me, when I teach the subject matter, to compare what's going on in the United States during the period that we cover to what I already known a little better, what was going on in Europe.
So really it almost has an aspect of globalization before globalization became a key word.
That's exactly it, Judy.
Tying that together. Now, you also had an opportunity, summer studies in Oxford in England. Tell me about that opportunity that you had.
Well, that was one of the first benefits we saw of the international mission that Dr. Leone adopted for the campus. That is a partnership with Oxford University. So yes, I was one of the, not the first, but I think maybe the third of the faculty to accompany a group of students to Oxford. And I had the opportunity to learn something about a topic I had been curious about a long time, but never really devoted serious study to, and that is the music of George Friedrich Handel and English culture in the late 17th or 18th centuries, and studied under a real scholar of music history there. And even though this was my 3rd time in England, I learned so much about Oxford and its role in English history that I hadn't appreciated before.
So being there firsthand at Oxford, learning from the people at Oxford really made an impact.
That's correct.
Carrying that through. So gathering all this information, is that then able to carry through as you teach the students today in the classroom, that background that you've gained over those years?
Oh yes, I still think the music of Handel can provide real insights into English culture, even English politics in the 18th century.
Now, working with students, Missouri Southern, you have a chance of smaller classes, working with students in the classroom. Share some of your thoughts about that opportunity you've had on the teaching side and working with students over the years.
That's certainly been one of the more gratifying things about my career at Missouri Southern. Manageable classes, students who, in some respects, compared to those in the colleges, universities I attended, or I served as a teaching assistant, may be somewhat more provincial, less aware of the world outside of the 4-state area, may be more likely to be first-generation college students. On the other hand, really value education, don't take for granted that they're in college. And that's been gratifying. And yes, especially in my upper level classes, the opportunity to look at documents, primary sources, discuss what they add to the textbook level of generalization they would have read about, have them read specialized secondary sources and share their information with their classmates in a way you really couldn't do in a much larger classroom.
Now, I know all fields of academia have been affected by technology changing over the years. I mentioned history has been one of those as well. The world of what you entered in 1982 coming to Missouri Southern, the technology, and what students today have available, what you have available as a professor working with the students.
Yes, and as my colleagues can tell you, I'm among the slowest of them to adapt new technologies, but it's been really gratifying. I no longer have to search the classrooms for the map I need to illustrate what I'm talking about. It's right there on the web and I can show it. I no longer have to worry about making copies of documents that we can discuss in class. I can project it on the screen. And I think having to go from the lecture outlines I first used to write on the board, then distribute in class, to PowerPoints, has forced me to think a bit more carefully about the main points I want to cover and how I can communicate them more clearly.
Now, for history, we think a lot about history and research, and your students, upper level students, research is a big part of, history majors and people wanting to go on in higher education. What do you encourage students who are interested in historical research? You mentioned them going to the original sources of information, but what do you tell the students of today if they want to find out more about the true story behind something and the research aspect? What drives them?
Well, as with everything with technology, it can be a mixed blessing. On the one hand, they have available to them in the form of ebooks or in the form of primary sources on websites, things that students at a regional university like Missouri Southern never could have had when I first started my teaching career. In that sense, technology has been an equalizer, a democratizing force. On the other hand, as I'm sure your viewers know, with technology, there are no editors on the web, which means, unfortunately, you cannot tell at first glance the reliability of the source you're consulting. Books you consult in the library have already been through a screening process through the publisher, through the librarians, through the faculty that recommend them. No such editing process on what's posted on the web. So I do find my students sometimes assuming to be true things that are just on the most convenient website they found. And that means when I have them do research, I have to encourage them, and sometimes I enlist the help of the reference librarians here, to ask the kind of questions that will lead them to the most reliable sources.
So ask those questions, be willing to dig a little further, get the right information, and tying that together. Now, for some of our viewers, they may recognize you from your involvement with History Day at Missouri Southern and the Regional History Day competition. Your feelings about that program where you have youngsters, middle school on up, doing that type of research and getting their interest in history at an early age. Have you enjoyed working with that over the years?
Let me be honest. At first, it was the part of the job I least liked when my department head, who I liked and respected, asked me if I'd take it on, and I was untenured. I didn't really have a choice. And at least at first, in part because of my poor organizational skills, it was a nightmare experience. Over time, I did develop my routine there also, quite honestly. I think National History Day has developed much better technologies for regional coordinators like me. But it has been gratifying. Even though it's true, the public we serve through this program is outside the Missouri Southern campus community. I think we have to recognize, how are we going to get college students who come to Missouri Southern with an interest in history if we have done nothing before them to generate an interest in history, to tell them that history matters, that it's one of the subjects that our society depends on. I mean, you can easily imagine what would happen to our society if you didn't have people studying math, biology, accounting. Mm-hmm. It might take some imagination, but not too much imagination to imagine what would happen to our society if no one understood history, if no one understood how a form of government came to be, if no one understood the problems that our country faced before, the mistakes we've made in the past that we might want to avoid in the future.
So learning from the past is a continuing
Yes.
process for people and continuing that interest. As you look toward retirement, you're doing phased retirement. What will you miss most about being a full-time faculty member here at Missouri Southern?
Well, it's easy to identify the things I won't miss. We're not required to do committee service
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I won't have to sit through long meetings, departmental or all campus. But I think I will miss the sense of collegiality that comes
Mm-hmm.
along with that type of academic service. And I will certainly try to stay in touch with my retired colleagues, my full-time colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to require more effort than it does now.
So a new phase of your life in the academic world, you'll be still teaching some classes here at Missouri Southern.
Yes.
And working in we call it the phased retirement program, and still maintaining that contact with the students. It sounds
Right.
like you enjoy that aspect of the job, working with the students.
Very much so.
Right. And if you had a tip for success for someone who maybe at the start of their career in higher education, what would you say that to keep them focused on having a nice, successful career?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer it. I can only say that what's worked for me, I think the first thing is you have to have a real passion for your discipline. Mm-hmm. It's not going to matter to students if it doesn't matter to you, and if they can't sense that it matters to you, having the correct story rather than the partially correct story, having a complete understanding of what happened rather than a textbook level or Wikipedia level understanding of what happened. If that doesn't matter to you, it's not going to matter to the students. So I would say first and foremost, I think you also need to develop a certain level of empathy with the students. Mm-hmm. To be sure, you got to hold them to very high standards, but over the years I've come to develop great respect for the many students who balance their academic careers here with part-time or full-time jobs with family responsibilities. And I think even though, again, you can hold them to very high standards, you need to develop empathy for the circumstances they face outside the classroom.
Right. Well, Dr. Teverow, I'd like to congratulate you once again on retirement and thank you for your many years of service to Missouri Southern. You've definitely had an impact on our university.
Well, it's been a truly gratifying experience for me. And Missouri Southern gave me a chance when, at the time, no one else would. And I can't imagine, in terms of my professional development, a much better match than the one between me and Missouri Southern.
Well, thank you very much, and enjoyed visiting with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
And I'd like to invite our audience to stay tuned because we're going to visit with another retiring faculty member right after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Newsmakers. We're continuing our interviews with retiring faculty members at Missouri Southern. Joining me in this portion of the program, Dr. Scott Cragin from the Marketing Department. Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure.
And you are wrapping up your career at Missouri Southern as a full-time professor. Someone were to ask you now, explain your position in the Marketing Department. What does it mean to be a marketing professor?
Well, I'm actually a marketing and a management professor. Mm-hmm. I've always taught both marketing and management. I've taught our capstone strategic management course for the last 20 years at least. Mm-hmm. And when I got my PhD in marketing, so I moved into some marketing classes. I'm currently teaching strategic management, which is the School of Business capstone, mm-hmm. and marketing strategy, which is the capstone in the marketing program.
What sparked your initial interest, perhaps even in your field, before you pursued higher education?
Oh, that's a long story. It turns out back in 1988 that I learned that my high school sweetheart got a divorce, and I was currently at that time working for a company called Cragin Technologies. I just gotten my MBA at Northwestern, and they moved me around the country to Seattle. I spent about 9 months there. In Long Island, I spent about 9 months, and then it just so happened one of their companies was in Joplin called Midcon Cables. And at the time, they wanted to send me off to Los Angeles to another company in this management development program, and I decided that I was going to hang around Joplin for that reason. Spent some time looking around for maybe a business to buy or something, and then my father, who was teaching at the time, said, why don't you go talk to Jim Gray out at the college? So I came out and talked to Jim Gray, and one thing led to another, and that's when I started.
So higher education, that transition from the business field to higher education, what was that like?
It was, the job that I had at the time was pretty interesting, but the company itself, I wasn't real whippy about the way they were managed. In fact, the last company that I worked for here in Joplin, Midcon Cables, the president of that company thought the best way to use a freshly minted Northwestern MBA was to do cold calls.
And eventually, then you went on to get your PhD.
Right, went on to get my PhD, started that in, I believe it was 97, back when we had a grow your own PhD program where the university would give you 2 years at half pay to complete your coursework, and then you come back and teach full-time while you work on your dissertation.
What convinced you when you got to campus and started working in the classroom that this is really what I like doing?
Well, it's interesting because business is one of the areas that's constantly changing and being updated. I mean, history's history, math is kind of math, but when it gets to business, you've got to maintain
You're keeping pace with the industry and the business world.
Your currency, and it's very important to do that. So it's a job that allows me to stay up on the world of business, and requires me to do so, actually.
And you've worked with many students over the years, and you mentioned in marketing and management.
Oh boy, yeah. I guess they had a tradition back when my father retired. They gave him a book with the list of all the students that he had taught. I don't think they do that anymore, but yes, it's gratifying to have touched so many in a lot of different ways. Not all of them were happy, because I taught the capstone course, and it is the toughest course in the curriculum, as it should be.
And when you teach a course like that, a capstone course, when the students, they're at the end of their path, they want to go out into the world and so forth, what are some of the keys to success for those students that are ready to say, I'm almost finished? Oh, well,
I have a video that I like to show my classes, because I'm teaching mostly seniors, and you may have seen them on the internet. That shift happens, or did you know? Talking about all the massive changes that are going on in the world. So, one of the things I tell them is that if you think you're done learning when you graduate, you are sorely mistaken, because I think that the top 5 jobs today did not exist 10 years ago. That sort of thing is going on. So lifelong learning is a fact of life. I make that point real clear, and I also tell them, when you're looking for a job, make sure that you understand what that company is going to do to develop you. Are they going to provide you training, educational assistance to get a master's or whatever it is, because you're not done learning when you graduate.
So there's no real end to the road. You're continuing to grow.
Absolutely not, and especially to make yourself more marketable. And also encourage them to consider double majors, minors, that sort of thing.
Of course, in terms of learning, we've had a lot of learning in the last couple of years, and I want for the audience to point out you're wearing the Great Game of Education shirt.
Yes,
so
indeed.
A lot of people have been learning at Missouri Southern about that.
We have just rolled out our mini game training. I guess I'll back up a little bit and tell a little bit about
from John Q. Public. What are we talking about?
Well, when Dr. Marble started here back in 2014, we were facing a $2.3 million budget deficit. And he said this is not sustainable. He formed the Financial Stability Committee, which had representatives from Board of Governors, faculty, staff, administration. And we studied things, studied the finances, studied options, and neither Dr. Marble nor I can remember who brought it up, but it turns out we both attended the same seminar in 1988 in Joplin that Jack Stack put on, who is the chair of SRC Holdings in Springfield, who is the author of the book, The Great Game of Business. And so we said, hey, let's contact them, find out what we can do. GGOB, Great Game of Business, is an open book management system. that doesn't just open the books, the finances for the employees. It makes the point of training the employees to understand the finances, so they understand.
Working together.
Absolutely, understand where the numbers come from. And that's something we took to heart, and we've been implementing it since that time. And we've, like I say, we've got 5 training modules right now. We've got an introductory training module. We have 3 finance modules, which really get into the details of our finances. This was one of the biggest challenges we had in this implementation. Was the banner system that we have was not really designed to extract the information that we needed. The audited financial reports have state requirements that make them obtuse to anyone but the financial and the budget people. And so it took a lot of time, and we actually had to enlist some outside IT help to be able to extract the information from our existing banner system and then be able to go in and get the reports we want. But now we have what we call a scoreboard, which is a picture of complete university finances, and then we also have scoreboards for every unit on campus. So every unit on campus can go in and see the revenue they generate, the expenses that they incur, and what they're doing for the university.
So really, you're keeping things in kind of layman's terms for those people who don't have business
Absolutely,
backgrounds.
and that was, again, the biggest challenge is how do we make this, because you've got to train to the lowest common denominator, so how do we make sure that everyone on campus understands the numbers?
So once you have the campus understanding the numbers, you have to take it the next step. You mentioned mini games before.
Yeah, that's the 5th module, I guess, that we've introduced, and that mini games are simply short-term efforts to improve something. And the something should be something that has line of sight to the critical number. The critical number is a number that represents a big opportunity and something that if you don't get fixed is going to result in bad things. And we determined our critical number was operating cash, because at the time we were operating on a deficit. And unfortunately, for the next fiscal year, we are talking about another deficit because of the governor's cutting our funding.
So looking together, so this is an ongoing program at Missouri Southern. You're entering phase retirement. Do you continue to see yourself involved in this project?
Absolutely. I've been devoting half of my time to the great game and half time to teaching. I've worked with Jeff Gibson. We've been driving this effort forward. And so I will be, when I go into phase retirement, I will be giving up the teaching side of things and going to full-time work on the great game of education, because we're not just hoping to implement it here at Missouri Southern and improve the university. Right. We're hoping to eventually market this to other universities and turn it into a revenue stream for Missouri Southern.
So Southern could become the role model for other schools to follow.
The role model and the consultant and the trainer and the
program developer for people.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned leaving the classroom. What will you miss the most when you do leave the classroom side of things?
I guess just the day-to-day students, seeing students and getting the feedback, the class discussion. Discussion is always a large part of the grade in my classes. So it's I'll miss getting their perspectives.
And for Missouri Southern, our smaller class size, has that played a big role throughout the years for you? Be only kind of know the students.
Oh, absolutely, and especially, well, it's something that allows me to, and the students probably don't like this, but allows me to add a little more rigor to the class. If I've only got 25 students, I can assign longer papers and more research stuff. Whereas if you have a giant section, you've kind of got to cut things back in order to be able to get it all graded.
For your side of grading things,
right,
and tying that together.
And that's actually what's coming up. It's the end of the semester crunch for me right now.
So all faculty are going through that. Everything's due. You get the projects when they're due.
Yep.
And you've worked with a lot of different people. You mentioned a few people. I imagine the people have made a big impact at Missouri Southern in your career.
Absolutely. Started out with Bob Brown as dean. Bob Brown. The thing I remember about Bob Brown was whenever you'd ask him how things are going, it's peachy. And then we moved to Jim Gray. Seen a lot of deans come and go, and the School of Business just hired a new dean who will be starting on July 1st, I believe. So
the leadership's changed, but the program continues to grow and develop.
Absolutely. No, and we've introduced 2 master's programs. We've got a Master of Accountancy and a Master of Management.
Right. Now, for the students who are entering business, what would be some of the keys to success for them? They want to go into marketing or management. Do they want to be one of those successful business people in the world?
Well, it's one of those. It's that's related to what I was talking about before, as continuing your education. And a degree is good, but you want to make yourself more marketable. So I encourage certifications. Right. The American Marketing Association has a Certified Marketing Professional certification, and really anything, internships, internships, anything that gives them experience and better knowledge about what it is they're doing.
And then after they graduate, now you have the master's programs. They can come back and continue.
Absolutely. This is our first year for the master's program, master's in management.
Now the campus itself has changed tremendously. I know the building you were in has gone through different developments over the years and additions. Can you kind of reflect on what the campus looked like in '87 or '89 versus what you have
Well,
now?
let's see. There was no Leggett and Platt. There was no Webster Hall. I think that's the two main ones. But things have definitely
added facilities and added.
Absolutely.
And we've also added the numbers of students over the years. You've seen enrollment grow.
Yes, we have. And we just had record enrollment, which is really good news because, that's another reason that the great game of education is so important, is because our state funding, actually we tracked it back in 1972-ish. The state was providing 68% of our funds. For the next fiscal year, it's going to be down under 30. And that tells you that we're becoming more and more tuition driven, and so we've got to get the students in. And Brad Hodson has been doing a pretty good job of getting them in because we have record enrollment.
So the whole role of a state institution has developed and changed over those years.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the state funding is, we just can't depend on it anymore.
Working together.
Which makes the great game of education all the more important.
So for people who work at Missouri Southern who are watching, we're going to continue to learn and find out more about implementation and activities for the great game.
Absolutely. We hope that the minigame training, which we just rolled out, is going to inspire minigames. And again, that's where any area can decide, okay, what is a critical metric in our area? What is it that we can measure? And that will have an effect on the critical number of operating cash. And one of the issues that we also have is, particularly on the academic side, is that there are very few things academics can do that have a direct effect. You can say, oh, I saved $5 because you might be able to do that with supplies where you reduce the number of supplies, but many of the direct effects in the academic side are indirect. So we've had mini games that address advising.
Right.
The kinesiology department did what they call pink, where they had a pink form and every advisor would have their advisees come in before midterm grades to talk about how things are going, how are you doing. And that's the sort of thing where you know that has a logical impact on retention because you're having more interaction with the students, helping them to make the right decisions, but you can't put a number on it. Right. So a lot of the things that we'll be working on, we will have, what we call face validity. Does it make sense that this affects that? And if so, we'll do it.
Great. Well, Scott, I'd like to thank you for your service as full-time here at Missouri Southern and wish you the best as you enter phase retirement.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to moving the great game forward.
Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
And thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join us again next week at the same time on the station. We'll see you then.